last year in my speech at the Hall of Fame. Perception is reality. And, you know, I think sometimes he may have forgotten that, but don't let what we're doing at night get in the way of business. I mean, that was a
What if the legend who raised the WWF into a global empire was also the mastermind behind its darkest betrayals? Imagine the Undertaker, the eerie icon of wrestling, suddenly pulling back the curtain on a conspiracy that spans the ring, the boardroom, and the most infamous backstage scandals. In this video, we dive deep into the shocking revelations that The Undertaker just dropped, uncovering how Hulk Hogan not only tore apart wrestling's first union, but also used his superstar status to manipulate politics, silence rivals, and cover up a racist rant caught on tape. And while Hogan's empire seems all good and prayer-filled, the truth shows a ruthless side that even Vince McMahon's own empire couldn't escape. Get ready to learn why The Undertaker has the rest of WWE on edge, and how this truth could rewrite wrestling history. Stick around, we're about to reveal everything you never knew about Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon. The Undertaker had always kept his silence about the people who crossed him, but now he was standing before the world, no longer a shadow in the background, and finally he was telling the truth about Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon. The truth was a jagged blade that cut clean through the gloss and bravado that had long defined the wrestling world. As the lights dimmed, the crowd waited, breaths held, for the story that had been buried for years under layers of mythology and corporate secrecy. Hulk Hogan, the larger-than-life hero in red and yellow, had long been the face of the business. He spoke to children about prayer and vitamins. He swooped down from the rafters in a thunderous leg drop, and he turned from hero to villain with the shocking NWO heel turn. Yet, the legend he built with his charisma hid a darker reality. Behind the persona was a man who was willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to preserve his own position. The most damning piece of evidence was a single, overheard conversation. In 1986, when the wrestling business was exploding in popularity, the men and women who performed in the ring had no safety net. They were classified as independent contractors, meaning no health insurance, no unemployment benefits, no job security. They traveled 300 days a year, performed night after night, and many suffered chronic pain and financial ruin. The promise of fame was a mirage when compared to the daily grind. It was Jesse Ventura, fresh from the set of Predator, who began to see a path out of this hardship. He was an outspoken, charismatic figure who had the words to rally the wrestlers. He stood up on a chair in a locker room, addressed the wrestlers, and declared, "Now is our time to unionize." He promised that if they refused to perform without a union in place, federal law would force the company to comply. He painted a picture of healthcare costs plummeting, retirement benefits being built, and dignity for those who had entertained millions. He spoke about what could happen if a union existed. He also mentioned that, if it worked, he could retire comfortably and make a modest pension for himself. He wasn't thinking only of himself. He was thinking of every wrestler who had given their body and soul to the business. The catalyst for his determination came from an unlikely source. On a flight to Las Vegas, he had an elevator ride with Gene Upshaw, the head of the NFL Players Association, who told him, "You boys need a union." That simple statement lit a fire. Ventura carried that spark back to the wrestling world, and on the next day, he took his impassioned speech to the ring, hoping to bring the wrestlers together. Vince McMahon, however, was already listening. Ventura later told his attorney that the call had been betrayed. A man in the locker room had betrayed Ventura, a traitor that existed everywhere, but no one knew who. McMahon had no idea how he heard about the union. Yet when Ventura's lawyer asked him in a deposition, McMahon responded, "Hulk Hogan told me." There was no hesitation. Hulk Hogan was a star, the locker room leader, the biggest name in the company, but he had been the one who betrayed his fellow wrestlers. The revelation was a thunderbolt. Hogan, the person who preached about doing the right thing, was the one who betrayed Ventura. McMahon's own admission was a confirmation that Ventura had not been alone in this betrayal. Hogan had earned more than the entire WrestleMania 3 roster combined, and he had no incentive to rock the boat. The current system was working for him. It was making him incredibly wealthy. In a locker room that should have been a place of solidarity, Hogan had been the one who shattered it. The consequences of that betrayal could not be overstated. Professional wrestling remains one of the few major entertainment industries without union representation. Wrestlers still have to live as independent contractors, no health insurance, unemployment benefits, or job security. Many careers could have been saved, many wrestlers could have retired with dignity instead of dying broke and broken. The pattern of Hogan's manipulation had become a template for the industry. The next pattern was the use of creative control. Hogan's contractual clause gave him the power to veto storylines or match finishes that he deemed unfavorable. In the hands of a top star, that could be reasonable, but for Hogan, it became a weapon that destroyed careers and broke dreams. It was a power that could be used or simply threatened. One of the most devastating instances of this politicking was WCW Starrcade 1997. The build-up had been a year of storytelling, a narrative crescendo, where Sting was finally supposed to defeat the leader of the NWO and reclaim WCW for the good guys. Fans had built the anticipation, the roar, the electric feeling of a story climax. Yet Hogan refused to let Sting lose cleanly. The finish involved a fast count by referee Nick Patrick, a muddled outcome that confused the audience and diluted Sting's triumph. Fans left the arena disappointed, their expectations unmet. It was a botched finish that erased the impact of what should have been a wrestling legend's triumph, turning a story comparable to Luke Skywalker defeating Darth Vader into a confused mess. The pattern was not isolated. Hogan had used his creative control only once, according to Eric Bischoff, but other wrestlers' accounts painted a different picture. The threat of his power was enough to get his way, and the damage extended beyond WCW. In WWE, his political maneuvering had already begun destroying careers and storylines. One of the most egregious examples involved Bret Hart, positioned as WWE's next top star after Hogan's departure. Bret Hart was a wrestler who had been positioned as the next big thing, a name that had already begun to rise. The pattern of manipulation was a clear sign of the toxic environment that Hogan had built, a toxic environment that turned the wrestling business into his personal playground. The Undertaker's revelation was not just an emotional catharsis. It was a truth that shattered the mythology and opened a new chapter for wrestlers who were still fighting the same battles that Ventura tried to address in 1986. The story was still ongoing. As The Undertaker's voice cut through the noise, the world could finally see that the wrestling industry was still missing a union, still missing the safety net that would protect the lives of those who risked everything to entertain the world.
Vince, because Vince, regardless of what anybody thinks, deep in his heart, he's one of the boys. He really is. And he has that.
The truth was a jagged blade that cut clean through the gloss and bravado that had long defined the wrestling world. It was a story that had been buried for years under layers of mythology and corporate secrecy. The story was finally told, and the world could finally see the man behind the hero and the system that allowed a single powerful individual to manipulate and shape the industry at the expense of everyone else. Undertaker's voice, once quiet and reverent, cut straight through the myth, exposing a darker layer beneath Hogan's silver-lined legend. It wasn't a single mistake, he says. It was a cascade of choices, each feeding the next until the entire fabric of the wrestling world began to unravel. With that, the story shifts to the Hart title refusal, the nepotistic webs that spanned WCW, the sabotage of a rising star, and the relentless spread of falsehoods that, over time, turned a hero into a pariah. The Hart incident sits at the core of Hogan's political muscle. When Vince McMahon and Hogan both sat at the boardroom table, the decision was clear. The world's top heel could not afford to share the spotlight with a younger, lighter competitor. Even though Hart, a wrestler of genuine talent, had earned the championship belt on the grand stage, Hogan's refusal to relinquish it sent a chilling message. It was more than a simple title denial. It was a demonstration that the biggest names in the business were willing to stifle potential to keep the spotlight firmly on themselves. That refusal rippled through the industry, creating a climate where new faces could never find their footing without a gatekeeper's blessing. And that gatekeeper, as the narrative shows, used his power not just to protect his own position, but to elevate a chosen few. Briscoe, and a cluster of loyalists saw their careers boosted while honest wrestlers slipped through cracks. The nepotistic chain is evident in the way Briscoe's story intertwined with Hogan's decisions. When Hogan refused to drop the title to Hart, the same pattern of favoritism extended to other promotions, like TNA and even independent events where Hogan's presence seemed to bring a boost, a guaranteed spot on a card that otherwise would have been contested. The effect was clear. Wrestlers were forced to choose between loyalty and ambition, with loyalty often yielding little reward. The sabotage of Steiner's momentum offers a more personal illustration of this politics. Steiner, once a bright, rising star, found himself stifled at the hands of Hogan. In the days before the sex tape incident, the WWE's backstage politics had already begun to erode his career. Steiner's frustration was not merely professional. It became a personal vendetta when Hogan denied the opportunity to compete for the title, citing only his own political agenda. In the heat of a match, Steiner once told the crowd that Hogan had took the wind out of his sails. The real sting came when Hogan's interference in Steiner's matches became a deliberate tactic, a way to keep Steiner from ascending the ranks. Steiner was forced to watch his potential be snatched away as Hogan's name became synonymous with victim of his own ego. The same pattern spread across WCW, where Hogan's influence manifested through decisions that stunted other competitors. The Hart incident, again, echoes a repeated refusal to relinquish the title, reinforcing that Hogan's power was not just personal but structural. In TNA, Hogan's presence was a double-edged sword. It brought brand recognition, but also a climate where politics ruled over merit. The same political tactics that kept wrestlers from ascending were echoed in smaller promotions, creating a broader culture of fear. Yet behind the politics were even deeper fissures, a web of fabricated stories that spanned decades. Hogan's narrative of muscle-bound heroism was punctuated by false claims about drug use, steroid use, and even personal health. The claims of Billy Graham and the steroid scandal reveal a man who publicly denied such behaviors while privately indulging in them. That contradiction amplified his reputation problem, as it highlighted a calculated deceit that had begun years earlier and was not corrected. Hogan's lie about being a steroid user came to light when Billy Graham, who had been the one to expose Hogan's steroid use in the past, revealed that Hogan had denied it publicly while privately acknowledging it. The dissonance between the two statements was not a trivial matter, but a profound moral hypocrisy. This was amplified by Hogan's repeated claims about his own health and the use of steroids, which were broadcast on national television, thereby influencing the impression of the younger generation that idolized him. Even more disastrous were Hogan's fabricated stories that spread across the internet. The rumors about his interactions with the Metallica band, claims about meeting superstar Billy Graham, and the claim of steroid use on national television all became part of the larger narrative that Hogan had become a liar. The claims about a child's relationship with a black man that was discovered in a sex tape also painted Hogan as a racist. This revelation sparked immediate consequences. WWE fired Hogan and removed him from the Hall of Fame. The fallout was immediate, and it would last for years. The industry's reaction was swift. Mark Henry, a prominent wrestler, was outspoken, noting that Hogan had not made a genuine effort to repair his reputation, deepening distrust. When WWE attempted to rehabilitate him in 2018 by reinstating him to the Hall of Fame, the response was ice cold. The New Day issued a statement that their community was difficult to forgive, while The Undertaker expressed that his reaction to Hogan's return to WWE was not a simple gesture but a statement of accountability. In short, Hogan's attempts at redemption were largely considered failures. Even his own son's statement about his father's lack of remorse was ignored, and the industry's reaction was to keep the spotlight on him. The Undertaker, a legend in his own right, took a moment to discuss the cultural shift that led to the acceptance of such an unforgivable personality. In the old days, the backstage politics of wrestling might have remained hidden, but the age of podcasts and social media made the truth impossible to keep secret. The Undertaker's commentary highlighted that fans and wrestlers discovered the union betrayal, the political games, the lies, and the racism. The combination of these made him a cautionary tale. This is why a figure of Hogan's stature, once a champion, is now considered a pariah. The narrative further shows that even Seth Rollins, a fan who grew up with Hogan, has not fully redeemed himself. The criticism came from MVP, who posted a meme that called Hogan a pathological liar. Tony Khan, the AEW president, banned Hogan from all AEW events, showing industry-wide disapproval. These were not mere criticisms, but a statement from those who finally had the courage to speak the truth about the man who spent decades hiding behind a lie. In TNA, the Hogan story continued with the political games that had been played in WWE.
It's not that circus, carny kind of thing anymore. It is a big, huge business.
The pattern was repeated with the same narrative of favoritism and the elimination of other wrestlers from the promotion. The narrative continues with the story of how the Union Rebellion, the political games, the lies, and the racism ultimately shaped the entire wrestling world. The Undertaker's revelations are a call to wrestlers and fans alike to recognize the difference between a public persona and a private reality. It is a warning that no hero can hide behind a mask forever, and that every action, even behind closed doors, echoes in the minds of those who see the show. In the end, it is a story about how a legend turned into a cautionary tale. Undertaker's revelations cut straight through the layers of myth, exposing a darker core beneath Hogan's glittering legend. He begins by reciting a key moment that had long stayed buried: the time Hogan would not relinquish the championship to Bret Hart. In front of a live audience, Hart had earned the title by defeating a formidable opponent, yet the decision to keep the belt became a symbol of Hogan's self-serving politics. The refusal was not a mere business choice. It was a deliberate act to preserve the status quo and to protect the power that Hogan wielded over every booking. In the backstage halls of WCW, that same pattern repeated itself with ruthless precision. Hogan's insistence on keeping the championship meant he used every tool at his disposal, nepotism and favoritism, to maintain control. Briscoe, and a cadre of wrestlers who had the privilege to work alongside him were handed opportunities that Hart and countless others could never claim. This favoritism became a clear illustration of how Hogan's political agenda was woven into the very fabric of each promotion. When the title was never passed on to Hart, the same political machine that benefited from that decision also extended its reach into smaller, less powerful promotions. It created an environment where new talent could never find a foothold unless they were either willing to bow to Hogan or willing to work in silence. The Undertaker draws a personal line to a star he called a rising force, the man who had the power to take the world's best heel. This man had a bright future and a legitimate claim to the championship. Yet the politics of Hogan made it difficult for anyone to gain the title or even be considered for a spot on the main card. The fallout was swift. Hart was never given another chance to defend the belt. The same story played out in WWE's internal politics, with the same refusal of Hogan and McMahon to give the championship to Hart, reinforcing the same patterns of favoritism and stalling. Steiner's story, meanwhile, provides a more intimate look at the politics that shaped the industry. Steiner, a wrestler who had begun to rise in popularity, was denied the opportunity to compete for the championship. When Hogan was called upon to make a decision about the title, he said, "I will not share it with anyone." Hogan's name had become synonymous with the idea that his ego was the one in control. The story shows that Steiner's frustration was not merely professional. It became personal when Hogan denied the opportunity for the title. The Undertaker points out that the sabotage of Steiner's momentum was not a sudden event. It had been an ongoing affair. The decision to keep the championship, the decision to favor Briscoe and others, and the decision to stifle new talent. This was a clear demonstration of how wrestling politics can shape a wrestler's career. As Hogan's reputation began to crumble, The Undertaker reminds us that the real harm was the erosion of the industry's integrity. The politics that were at the center of WCW had an impact on the entire industry, affecting promotions as far as TNA and independent wrestling events. The Undertaker also highlights how Hogan's influence reached beyond WCW. In TNA, Hogan's presence was a double-edged sword. It brought recognition, but it also imposed a culture of politics over talent. The same political tactics that stunted wrestlers' progression were mirrored in smaller promotions, creating a climate where politics ruled over merit. It was a double-edged sword, and the story was one of a system that could not be broken until the power was removed. Behind the politics, The Undertaker reveals a deeper layer of lies that spread across decades. Hogan's fabricated stories about drug use and steroids were not mere rumors. They were a web of falsehoods that shaped the narrative of the wrestling world. In interviews, Hogan denied using steroids while admitting to private consumption, a contradiction that was revealed by Billy Graham and the steroid scandal. The lies that spread across the internet were more than just rumors. They were part of a larger narrative that Hogan had become a liar, a man who could not keep his truth inside. The stories about his interaction with the Metallica band, his meeting with superstar Billy Graham, and his own steroid use on national television were amplified by the web, creating a sense of the world's biggest wrestler as a liar. The story of Hogan's racism added a darker layer to the legend, creating a sense of a hero's identity that was built on lies. The sex tape involving a child's relationship with a black man was discovered, revealing that Hogan had used a sex tape to spread a story that painted him as a racist. The revelation sparked immediate consequences. WWE fired Hogan and removed him from the Hall of Fame, marking the beginning of a longer saga. The industry's reaction was swift. Mark Henry, a prominent wrestler, was outspoken about Hogan's lack of genuine remorse, and the failure of his attempt to repair his reputation deepened distrust. When WWE attempted to rehabilitate him in 2018 by reinstating him to the Hall of Fame, the response was harsh. The New Day issued a statement that their community was difficult to forgive. The Undertaker, a legend in his own right, expressed that his reaction to Hogan's return to WWE was not a simple gesture, but a statement of accountability. In short, Hogan's attempts at redemption were largely considered failures. Even his own son's statement about his father's lack of remorse was ignored, and the industry's reaction was to keep the spotlight on him. The Undertaker, a legend in his own right, took a moment to discuss the cultural shift that led to the acceptance of such an unforgivable personality. In the old days, the backstage politics of wrestling might have remained hidden, but the age of podcasts and social media made the truth impossible to keep secret. The Undertaker's commentary highlighted that fans and wrestlers discovered the union betrayal, the political games, the lies, and the racism. The combination of these made him a cautionary tale. This is why a figure of Hogan's stature, once a champion, is now considered a pariah. The narrative further shows that even Seth Rollins, a fan who grew up with Hogan, has not fully redeemed himself. The criticism came from MVP, who posted a meme that called Hogan a pathological liar. Tony Khan, the AEW president, banned Hogan from all AEW events, showing industry-wide disapproval. These were not mere criticisms, but a statement from those who finally had the courage to speak the truth about the man who spent decades hiding behind a lie.